November 4th, 1956. A man named Ray Kroc walks into a small burger stand in San Bernardino, California, and watches something that doesn't make sense to him. Customers order. Food arrives in 30 seconds. No waitresses. No idle time. No waste. He isn't looking at a restaurant. He's looking at a machine built entirely around one idea: that people will pay a premium every single time to avoid doing something themselves. He didn't know it yet, but he was staring at the blueprint for one of the most profitable psychological patterns in modern business history. And it wasn't going to stop at burgers, because what Kroc saw that day would eventually become a template, copied, refined, and multiplied across nearly every industry that touches daily life. Food, transportation, shopping, entertainment, even thinking itself, eventually, would get outsourced for a price. The businesses that understood this one uncomfortable truth about human behavior didn't just succeed. Some of them became worth more than entire countries' economies. But this isn't a story about fast food. That's just where the pattern started showing its teeth. Rewind further. In 1930, a grocer named Michael Cullen wrote a letter to his employer proposing something radical: a store where customers grabbed items themselves, off shelves, with no clerk required to fetch each one. His employer said no. So Cullen quit and opened his own store in Queens, New York. He called it King Cullen. It became one of the first supermarkets in America. The idea wasn't really about groceries. It was about removing friction, even the tiny friction of asking someone else to get something for you. Cullen didn't know he'd just written the opening chapter of a business principle that would eventually be worth trillions of dollars combined, across companies not yet built, in industries not yet imagined. But that's not the full story. Because convenience alone wasn't the discovery. The real discovery, the one almost nobody said out loud in boardrooms, but every successful founder seemed to intuitively understand, was that people would pay disproportionately more to save relatively little effort. Not because it made logical sense, because it felt good in the moment. And feelings, it turned out, were far more profitable than logic. Jump to 1954. Two brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald, had already stripped their restaurant down to a speedy service system, a factory-line approach to burgers that eliminated car hops, cut menus down to almost nothing, and moved food into a customer's hands faster than any competitor in the country. Ray Kroc wasn't the inventor. He was the man who realized the system was worth more than the burgers. In 1961, he bought the brothers out for $2.7 million. Today, the company he built off their idea is worth over $200 billion. And here's what nobody saw coming. The McDonald brothers, the actual originators of the model, walked away with a fraction of what the idea eventually became. According to accounts from the negotiation, Kroc had reportedly promised them an additional percentage of future revenue as a verbal agreement, one that was never put in writing. They never received it. It became one of the most quietly devastating footnotes in American business history. The people who built the machine got a check, while the man who scaled it built an empire. That imbalance between the person who spots the pattern and the person who industrializes it would repeat itself again and again for the next 70 years. By the 1990s, laziness wasn't just tolerated by businesses. It was actively engineered. Pizza chains began measuring delivery speed to the second. Grocery stores added express checkout lanes not for efficiency, but because psychological studies showed people would abandon purchases entirely if forced to wait too long in a slow line, even by 90 seconds. The cost of losing that customer was calculated to be worth more than the cost of hiring extra staff. Human impatience had become a line item on a spreadsheet. But there was a deeper problem no one had noticed yet. Convenience businesses were about to collide with something new: the internet. In July of 1994, a former Wall Street executive named Jeff Bezos sat in his garage in Bellevue, Washington, and began building software for a bookstore that had no physical shelves. Critics at the time assumed people wouldn't buy something sight unseen without holding it first. What they missed was the deeper appetite underneath the purchase. Not the desire for books, but the desire to never leave the house to get them. Amazon didn't just sell products. It sold the elimination of a trip. By 1997, the company went public. By 2020, Amazon controlled roughly 40% of all U.S. e-commerce. The company had taken Cullen's 1930 grocery insight and Kroc's speed of service obsession and merged them into a single, terrifying, efficient machine, one that could deliver almost anything to a doorstep within 24 hours. And this is where everything changes. Because once convenience proved it could scale globally, an entirely new category of company emerged, ones that didn't sell products at all. They sold time itself. Or more precisely, they sold the removal of small, everyday inconveniences that people had simply lived with for generations. Consider a single moment. March 2011, San Francisco. Two entrepreneurs, Garrett Camp and Travis Kalanick, are standing outside a tech conference, unable to find a cab. Out of frustration, they build an app allowing anyone to summon a private car with the press of a button. It wasn't framed as a transportation company. But that's not the full story either. Because behind every one of these companies was a quieter, less discussed reality. Convenience had a cost, and it wasn't always paid by the consumer. It was often absorbed by the workforce underneath them. Gig delivery drivers, warehouse pickers, and rideshare operators were the invisible infrastructure making instant gratification possible. Multiple labor investigations throughout the 2010s and 2020s scrutinized wage structures, algorithmic scheduling, and classification disputes across these platforms, some resulting in lawsuits, some in regulatory rulings, some still unresolved as of this recording. The industry that profited from removing friction from customers' lives had, in many documented cases, added friction into the lives of the people making that removal possible. This is where the story stops being about clever business models and starts becoming something closer to a mirror. Because the pattern didn't stop at products or errands. It moved into decision-making itself. Streaming platforms began auto-playing the next episode before a viewer could even reach for the remote, removing the friction of choosing to keep watching. Subscription services quietly shifted from opt-in to auto-renew as an industry default, because studies within the subscription economy repeatedly showed cancellation required active effort, and effort was the single greatest barrier to retention. Some analysts have referred to this design philosophy simply as friction reduction as revenue strategy, a phrase that, stripped of its polish, essentially means the harder it is to stop, the more money is made. By 2023, some market research estimates placed the broader convenience economy, delivery platforms, ride-hailing, meal kits, subscription auto-renewals, and instant retail, at a combined global value well into the hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Not because any single company discovered something new, but because, going back to Michael Cullen's grocery aisles in 1930, an original insight had simply never stopped compounding. Humans will consistently choose ease over effort, and they will pay for that choice, often without fully registering that they've made it. What's left out of most retellings of this story is that none of these founders, not Kroc, not Bezos, not Kalanick, invented laziness. They didn't create the impulse. They noticed it. They measured it. And then they built infrastructure precisely calibrated to meet it, faster and more frictionlessly than the version before it. The innovation was never really the product. It was the removal. And that raises an uncomfortable question that most of these companies have never had to answer publicly. What happens to an economy and to the people inside it when nearly every major industry is optimized around minimizing effort? It's a question without a clean resolution. The data is still being written, quarter by quarter, download by download, one-click order by one-click order. There's another story about a company that used this same psychological insight, but pushed it so far it collapsed almost overnight, taking billions of dollars and thousands of jobs down with it in a matter of weeks. That story is even harder to believe. If you love stories that reveal the hidden side of business, history, and money, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new documentary.